Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Marriage. I'm your host, Melanie Studley.
What's up, guys? My name is Seth Studley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. We want you guys to check out Jocelyn and Aaron Freeman of Meet the Freemans and the conversation we had about their brand new book called The Argument Hangover. It's really cool. They had super cool steps to go through that's going to help you no matter what.
All right, let's dive in.
Hey guys, what's up? Seth and Melanie here. We're super excited to hang out with Aaron and Jocelyn Freeman of Meet the Freemans. What's up, you guys?
Hello, glad to be here.
Thanks for having us on.
Yes.
Yeah, I know we've done some back and forth of we've seen your guys' stuff, you've seen our stuff, and sometimes it seems like the more we get into the space, that's just the thing. Like, oh, we'd love to. Okay, this is opening, let's do it.
Right.
We can't, kind of thing. And we had some back and forth there, so we're super excited to finally be able to sit down with you guys, and we want you to talk about all the stuff you have going on, especially, well, we were talking earlier about moving to North Carolina and all that stuff. We can get into that, which I'm excited about. But your main thing, The Argument Hangover, your brand new book, you guys.
Yes. Yeah. The Argument Hangover. I'm sure people listening who are in a relationship or have ever been in a relationship are like, I know exactly what that means. I know exactly what it feels
like.
Right. The Argument Hangover period. And just to briefly define it for people to have context, the Argument Hangover is a term that we created to describe the period of time after a disagreement that lasts all the way up until you fully reconnect emotionally. And oftentimes people think the goal is to avoid conflict altogether, when rather it's actually to shorten the argument hangover period. And we can go into all the things about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. So
That's
I know
great.
that I just dove straight into it, but
Right.
can you guys introduce yourselves to our listeners who may not be familiar with your work?
Oh, sure. Well, so Aaron and Jocelyn Freeman, known as the Freemans, and we're relationship coaches and work with mostly couples together, which is great. We're really honored to do that work. And I think that I think people like to share the highlight reel, but it really started from us having completely different views of relationships. He grew up in a household where there was no conflict. He really didn't see what, healthy communication about emotions looked like. Whereas I watched my parents go from madly in love to intense divorce. And so I had this fear around divorce, and we just had totally different blueprints and ideas for relationships. In fact, he tried to break up with me a few months in. And so long story short, you can ask all the elements that you want, but we got into this work because we really didn't see a lot happening out there. Now there's, more people popping up doing like couples work. But when we started, all we saw was work in the church and then counseling. There
Right.
wasn't really any relationship coaching, any couples coaching. When we would Google, it was very hard to find. There weren't like workshops and seminars for couples that, again, weren't like counseling based or from a church. And so we've been honored to do this work and have done, all the workshops and all the highlight reel stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
awesome.
So how long have you been doing this work? Like, what's your timeline of all that?
What are we in 2020? I don't pay attention to time. So 2021, so going on 6 years.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Y'all are
Awesome.
crushing it. That's
You know
amazing.
what? So just with this Valentine's Day 2021, it kind of like came and went.
Right.
But it was the
That's true.
4-year anniversary of when we first
when we
released
started our
episode
stuff.
of
And
our
we
stuff, so-
started it for the exact same reason that you guys did, which is really cool because it's like we found the exact same issues where when we were going through the hardest part of our marriage, we're like, how do we do this? What do we do? There's nothing out there for us. And so I love that your motivation was like basically the same exact thing. We want to do what would have been helpful for us. So that's exciting. That's so exciting.
Yeah. And how long have you guys been married?
Almost 6 years. No. But we don't pay attention to time. Like I forget
like you
how old
said,
I am.
Given that
Right.
it was out of necessity when we got together, realizing, okay, all challenges come from that there's a missing skill, and just having that awareness, like, you know what? I don't feel like we're fully set up for like the best marriage ever because we're just out here like guessing. So out of necessity, and then out of necessity, you practice. Out of the practice, you like embody, and then people ask you. Then you have courses and coaching after that. So,
Right on.
Well, that's crazy. You guys dove into it in real time while you were like, hey, wait a minute. Well, I've only known you for X amount of years.
8 minutes.
8 minutes. And then let's start a podcast. Ours was a little different than that. We were probably married about 10 years when we first, maybe 12 years. But yeah, we created the show that we wanted when we were going through all the hard stuff, right? Creating the resources that we wish we had.
Right.
So, okay, that's awesome. So you talk about the argument hangover, and that's such an interesting concept because I know any couple that's listening right now has been like, I know exactly what they're talking about.
Right.
In another video, you described it as like the feeling you have after maybe if you went out partying too much and had too much alcohol, or like you had a huge heavy meal or something like that. You're just like, oh my goodness, I'm in like a zone and it doesn't feel good. And like arguments really feel that same way, because I believe that I think one of our core longings is we want to be really connected heart-wise to our partner, right? And then I guess I'll use your language, the argument hangover, we feel that disconnect in that. So I know every single person listening knows exactly what that is. And you talk about the 5 R's of repair after the conflict. And that reminds me a bit of, are you guys familiar with John and Julie Gottman?
Of course. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So he talks about like repairing, and he has cards and stuff. And I believe you guys do too. And how actually impactful and you can do certain interventions right then, right there to get you back on track. And this is funny because we kind of had a little argument over the weekend, and I had that feeling like, oh gosh, I'm like, am I stoned? Did I drink too much? No, I didn't, but I felt like that. Right. So can you guys dive into the 5 R's of repair?
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to acknowledge why the hangover really struck me was even around, I used to drink in my college days and before Jocelyn, and it was that idea of being guilty or wishing I hadn't taken actions that I did when out drinking. That's what really struck me about, I really wish I hadn't said what I said to my partner when I was heated.
Right.
That is really what I feel, causes that argument hangover. So, it's not about avoiding these conflicts, but shortening that time period.
Right.
And so, you have pattern interrupts, as you mentioned, but really once you've got into it, the 5 R's are really powerful, because the first one being that you need to request a pause. Like when you are in it and you feel this is really not effective, it's really not going anywhere, emotion is too high, and we're starting to do more damage now by how we're acting rather than the original cause, it's just great to request a pause in which you individually are going to reflect on, okay, what really brought this up? What was the source of this actually?
Yeah, to go into that a little bit more, because what we see often is people go, well, I said I'm sorry.
Right.
And they think that's enough. Whereas what we talk about is actually, it doesn't close the circle. It's almost like you leave this circle open partially because you didn't really acknowledge the impact that your actions and your words had on the partner, and even acknowledge maybe more the root cause. So people then just want to get past it. I'm sorry. Okay. Can we just brush it? Can we get on with our day? I'm sorry. And they think that's enough, but really there's still hurt. So the first R being reflect on what was really the source of this. How did you play a part? Second R, you take responsibility for it.
It's the toughest piece, I think, for me.
Right.
I think for the males.
Many people to take responsibility for the
Sorry,
action.
I'm wrong. You're right.
Not even always like admitting. I think that's what, again, people can try to make as the gold standard, is admitting they're wrong. And I don't think that's always the solution. It's more so acknowledging where you started to take actions from your triggers and you started to act unconsciously. And that is what really caused the damage from the disagreement, is like how we act in those triggered states. So I don't want to keep going through them, but those are the first two.
Well, no, I really like that. And I might pause on a couple points. Acting on a trigger.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's big, because we, in our work, we talk about being intentional and then trying our best to be proactive rather than reactive. So if we know what our triggers are beforehand, before we get flooded, which of course, again, Dr. John Gottman's work, when we're flooded, it's like, okay, our brains are turned off. We're in our lizard brain, right? So acting on a trigger, if we can first take that or have that awareness ourselves, and like, what I just said, I acted from a trigger right there. Okay, pause. Let me do what I need to do to slow everything down. So I really like that, acting on our triggers. Okay.
And one of the things I want to say too, that it kind of reminded me of, was that I saw in one of your videos, you talked about this idea that people don't realize that having emotions is okay. Like we are trained to think that if I'm having an emotion, it is bad.
Don't get mad. Why are you so upset?
Right.
Like, well,
when you said that, I was like, oh, that's such a good, that's such an insightful idea, because if we're taught to like suppress our emotions, and then we have a trigger and we have no education on how to manage what to do next, it's sort of like this terrible feedback cycle of perpetuating not doing the right thing, if that makes sense. It just, that popped up into my head as you said that, but I don't want to get sidetracked on the R's.
Yeah.
So go back.
No, I know we have 3 more, and
Right,
this is good. This will add value to our listeners.
I love
So-
that you're fired up about it. It's great.
It's really exciting.
You're really right too. And the one thing that I came to realization for myself is if I sort of avoid emotion, primarily because I don't want to feel the negative emotions, essentially what you slowly do is numb yourself to even feeling celebration, bliss, excitement, optimism. So you just kind of start to, you're just on like cruise control. So that was really striking for me. It's like, I can't limit my feeling of negative emotions because it's going to then give a ceiling or cap to my also positive emotions. And that's at least how I felt about it.
Right. That's
So
a great
after
idea.
the first 2 R's, reflect and take responsibility, then you reconnect.
Oh, one quick thing on responsibility.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it is a shift. It's not coming together and saying, you know what, we could be past this. All you have to do is take responsibility that you started this, right? Admit your blame. If we're going to be true leaders in our own relationship, you don't just look for if I had responsibility, you look for where you can take responsibility for. It might not have been what started it, but there's got to be something that you did or a way you were being that perpetuated it or led to a long argument hangover. So where can you take responsibility, not if you had responsibility.
Right. I love that because so often couples, we do coaching as well. And so often couples will, you can tell when they want it to be someone else's fault. Like you can, and even if they don't say that sort of explicitly, you can tell by the way they kind of push away having any ownership in anything. And we've got 3 kids and we realize that their bad behavior is sometimes, often, always a reflection of something that we've actually either done. And then, and I love that idea of instead of like, do I have any blame here? Where, what is it that I did that added or took away or got sidetracked in this moment? So I love that. We maybe shifting the way we think of the word blame or ownership or whatever responsibility, to feel more empowering and less like a bad thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I want to offer too, before going on to the third R, that I think that a word that I really would empower people to focus on is the responsibility word, as opposed to like, I know blame is a shorter word, but blame has a lot of negative energy around it. Whereas responsibility, to even soften it, is your ability to respond.
Yes. I was just
I can't remember who said that, like some awesome author, but I think that responsibility is a much more neutral emotion as opposed to blame having a little bit more charge to it and kind of can feel negative inside. Okay, so anyway, going back, third R, reconnect, which is easier said than done, because especially in that argument hangover period, because of what was said and done, you almost want distance from them.
Right.
It really takes something, setting aside the ego inside of you, to actually want to physically and emotionally come back together. And so people will unfortunately let the disconnection period last, like you said, days, weeks. So you want to reconnect, share where you're taking responsibility. Hey, what I realize and where I'm taking responsibility is. Then fourth R, remind.
Well, a little bit more on that one too, because there's a lot of science behind whether it's the law of reciprocity or mirror neurons. If you can go first by literally saying, hey, partner, where I see I can take responsibility is, just my overall attitude was not great. So you say that, your partner is more often than not going to say, well, where I see I can take responsibility is. Right. So by you going first, you're also going to have the opportunity to really come together and like both share your responsibility, which, has most of us feel a little bit better. Right. So when you do that, you're oh, go ahead, Steph.
Well, I'm thinking about the power of that and the power of vulnerability, right? Brene Brown's work. And if we can lead with vulnerability, what does that usually do? Like in our history of basically any argument we ever had, whoever's gone first, the other one, mostly, we mostly, that invites me to be like, oh, you're right. It like literally melts the ice and sets the tone for like, okay, our shared vision of where we want to be is here. We both agree with that. That's our standard for connecting and a happy marriage and all that. You go first, that invites me. And sometimes for couples, depending on family of origin or whatnot, going first and being like, well, I've been so hurt in the past. I can't go first no matter what. Like Melanie has that ability to soften that. And of course I've done it too, but it's just contingent upon the situation. But I love that the going first, the taking responsibility and leading with vulnerability.
Well, it makes me think of, we often say, when I bring it, you get it. And meaning, like, if I bring a bad attitude, that's what you get. Like that's what it sets the tone for everything. And it falls right in line with the mirror neuron idea. If I bring a good attitude, that's what you get. And it's going to feed back into me. So we like to turn it into like little silly things, but it really works. It's so true too, again, with parenting, where it's like, depending on how I show up is completely going to shape how my kid shows up.
Absolutely.
And when I bring it, they get it, and vice versa. So I love that you guys are using science too. I mean, that's like my favorite. I'm a total nerd for that stuff, but keep on with your R's. Let's keep talking.
No, I love the fire that you guys have. So the fourth R is to remind, and that's to remind each other of both your commitment to each other, because especially if it was a more escalated disagreement, even the most confident partners who do tons of self-development can still feel hurt, and still, even sometimes our insecurities can come up, and sometimes even people have a connection from conflict to, do you still love me? You know, that can even come from like my upbringing. I saw when I made my parents upset, do they still love me? And that could show up in the relationship. And so you want to remind each other of your commitment and remind each other of your agreements for conflict, which I know some people listening go, wait, Freemans, we don't have agreements for times of conflict. That's a whole other conversation that would be a segue. And we do go into that in the Argument Hangover book, but it's critical that you have agreements for times of conflict so that it isn't a free for all. You don't get to act any way you want just because you're triggered. So you remind each other of the agreements, and then?
Well, the fifth R is to reconcile. Once you go through all these steps, you're in a much better place. You're connected. Your energy is such that you're wanting to move forward. But the real benefit of a conflict is to reconcile it into the opportunity that it actually is.
Which is different than what most people do. They remember it as something they wish didn't happen, or that ruined a Saturday, or they never want to have happen again.
It's actually a whole other sort of idea around consciousness, that once something is in the past, it's only in how you remember it. So actually, if you start to adjust the way you remember things, not like, oh, we had that conflict and we repaired from it, but you still think of it as disappointing or a place that you lost trust. The fifth step is powerful. You come together and say, what did we learn? How did we grow even deeper? What did I see for myself to grow as an individual? Now, how you remember that conflict was a benefit to you and the relationship. So having a conversation to reconcile it into the opportunity for learning is a powerful way to not come back to it later, because you've already changed it into a positive.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That is, so I didn't know if you guys knew, but I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist for about, 13 years or so. So I refer back to science and research often, and Gottman is coming up a lot in this conversation. And one of the determinants for a successful marriage is if, and this is anecdotally, it's not verbatim, but he has studied this, is how we remember the past. Like, was our wedding day, just blissful? Was the birth of our children, was it traumatic? Was it hard? Or was it like the best thing ever? Those vacations that we went on, how we handle money, all these things, the real determinant. If we remember them just negatively, then we're like, oh yeah, our marriage has never been good. How can I expect it to be good now? But as we can, this is cool, because I really like this. And this takes some, maybe even a different level of consciousness for couples who are struggling with, having bad memories in the past. You said this, or you said that, or remember that time my mom did this, or whatever. If we can go back and rewrite the narrative around that, you know what? That was a really hard time, but I learned so much about myself in that makes me stronger today, or like, man, when we had that tragedy happen in our family or whatever, you and I came together so strongly, and it was so cool. It can galvanize a marriage for good or for bad. So that's really cool. I love that you guys brought that up.
It's so weird. I want to share a story that is going to sound not related, but it totally made me think of this. So when we got engaged, you guys, it was not great. Seth's family is from the deep South.
Well, the engagement was cool. Right. But
I'm from Seattle, like tattoos, who cares? Purple hair, no one cares. But the Deep South, the Bible Belt, it ain't the same there. And when we got engaged, his mom called me. And people know the story. It's not like a secret or anything. But his mom called me on the phone and let me have it, you guys. She told me up, down, left, and right, all the ways that I was terrible. I was selfish. I was awful. I was going to ruin her son. Wow. And I never once got mad back at her. And this is not me being like, I'm so great. Look at how great I am. Mm-hmm. But I took the opportunity I was like, I want to get married, and this is his mom, so I better do this right. But then one of the things that made me think of this sort of the reconciliation part of it and reconciling or whatever is that I never looked back at that experience with any amount of bitterness, anger, hurt, anything. I just said, I learned a lot about how a mother loves a son and how a wife loves a man. Like it taught me a lot. And that's all the takeaway has always been, and the focus has always been, and the remembering has always been aimed towards what growth did that bring? How did it make me a better person? Our relationship stronger? When the majority of people would have been like, that's it, I'm done. Your mom's the worst. Let's fight for 1,000 years. So it's interesting because it really is this sort of like metacognition energy where you realize like, I actually interpret what my memories mean. Mm-hmm. I interpret if they're good or bad. Right. I overlay that. Everything is basically neutral and I overlay it on top. Well, not everything's neutral, but you know what I mean? So I love that that's how you're teaching this. And I love that it's the energy that you bring is really complex, deep thinking and sort of analyzing even the way that we think about our memories. I think that's genius. Mm-hmm. You guys
if I can jump into, I think that I love what you just said. If you look at even the things that influence us like media, we're really influenced by movies and TV. That's where we pick up a lot of beliefs and patterns about the world. And what do we see in movies when conflict happens? Breakups, divorce, depression, and just it being a horrible season. We don't really see these depictions of like a healthy conflict happened, they reconciled it, and they're stronger for it. Mm-hmm. It's often portrayed as this intense thing, and then the relationship ends. Mm-hmm. And so I invite people to start to see conflict as not something that's bad, but actually is one of your greatest opportunities for learning about yourself. Like people who listen to podcasts are all, I would assume into self-development. Like you're listening because you're wanting to grow. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to have self-development, that doesn't happen from the rosy conversations in your relationship. That happens from the conversations where you are confronted and where your beliefs are being challenged and where you're triggered and you want to do your default thing. And so when I changed the way I saw conflict, actually something that can be quite transformative, quite healing, powerful for our bond, it changed the way I showed up in conflict.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that as you were saying that, the thing that kept coming to my mind was in almost all areas in our lives, we expect and assume that growth will be a part of that. Parenting, you expect that you'll get like better as your kids are older.
Financially, we all hope to make more money to improve.
No one is like, stay financially stagnant forever. That's the goal. But that's kind of how they approach long-term monogamous relationships. Like you're saying, in social media and TV and movies, it's like the worst examples humanly possible. There's never growth. It's just we freak out and then we fight.
Always, this is me, take it or leave it.
Right. Like hands in the air, like you're throwing up your hands, whatever. That sounded kind of like a party. That's not what I meant. Like you give up, not a party.
Not a fun party.
But it's weird to think that like, if we want to get better at anything, it's through the trials of getting better. For some reason, the idea of fencing, like someone fencing, you get better by practicing on the thing you're not good at. Right? You don't get better by only doing the things you're good at. Right. You get better by doing the things you're struggling with. So how we have sort of demonized arguments or conflict in marriage is really sad because that is how we grow. It is how we understand what our weaknesses are and how we change them by stepping into them, practicing them, transforming them, adjusting, dissecting. But people don't see it that way. They see it as this is bad, stay away from it. And I always think at the end of this conversation or argument or whatever that Seth and I might have, I'm going to know something more. I'm going to have something revealed to me that will help. And so that's the energy that I tend to come into.
Maybe I'm more like Aaron, kind of being like conflict avoidant to some degree. I'm like, let's don't talk about this.
Is Aaron conflict avoidant? Did you just label him?
No, you had said something that maybe you had gone that way a little bit. So that's just funny. I'm not
Don't label
pigeonholing you. Sorry.
No, I didn't take it as a label. Actually, in our book, we do have 4 communication personality types. And that was a better way for us to see our dynamic, because communication is not one size fits all. So I do fall as a reserved, inflexible type, which has some tendencies, as you say, to be, conflict avoidant, or at least like shut down or stop talking as a better way than sort of the outward burst. But what that does is have Jocelyn feel isolated and shut out. She doesn't know what's going on. And so the repressive actions can be just as hurtful as the reactive actions as well.
Right. Tell us more about the types. I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, so it's actually really helpful to, just because I know some people are listening, but are also visual learners. So in the book, we have visuals to show what the 4 types are like. So there are 4 communication personality types, which came from us after having so many conversations with couples, realizing that one partner would try to work on communication and the other partner wouldn't be implementing it the exact same way, or would do it, in a different way. So then they'd be like, no, you're not communicating, you're not doing it. And so we really, after synthesizing, I come from a research background even before this work. So I actually really love like watching trends and data and all the things. So we realized there are actually 4 different communication personality types, and it's a 4x4, matrix model.
2x2.
Sorry. Yes. 2x2, 4 squares. And so there's assertive, inflexible, assertive, flexible, reserved, inflexible, and reserved, flexible. So
I love that.
It would take a lot longer we actually do like long workshops on this. So it would be a little bit hard to go into all 4, but as a brief to describe our type, because it'll even help people start to get. So I'm assertive, inflexible, which means I process through talking, which is why sometimes people will say like, you have to say it so many times for you to get it, right? Like you repeat yourself. And that's oftentimes how assertive partners do communicate, is like by saying it and almost saying it over and over again. The inflexibility piece that I have indicates that if I'm not conscious, I can be pretty attached to my perspective. And that's when I can sometimes interrupt him and be like, no. But then the reserve type,
they all have interesting dynamics. So in this one, the reserved, inflexible, I might even give more of the compliance yes. I might shut down or be like, yeah, I see it your way, and then not say a lot else. So that leaves Jocelyn feeling like I'm on board and agreeing with what she's saying. This even came up last week for us, where I was like, oh, I'm such a good listener. I listened so intently. She felt understood. But what I didn't say was that I agreed with that or I was on the same page. So she would just assume that in my listening and understanding, we were on the same page. But the reserved, inflexible is like, no, I see it my way, but I might not necessarily be so open in expressing that, which can cause assumptions and expectations.
So as an example of a tension and pain point, because actually quite a few couples have one assertive partner and one reserved. What's interesting is the assertive type can be frustrated that the reserve type takes more time to process. So they can almost keep asking more and almost trying to rush their timing, which only makes reserved partners shut down more if they're unconscious. But the assertive type is just needing to be clued in that the reserve partner is processing and thinking. Right. So it helped a ton when Aaron started to say, hey, I don't have an answer for you right now. I need to actually think through that. Can I come back to you in a couple hours? Rather than the reserve type can tend to just be like, I don't know. And just leave the assertive partner hanging.
Right. And then that makes me think of the pursuer distancer dynamic that I see a lot of in therapy and family systems. It's like, okay, if the assertive type is pursuing, hey, what do you think? What do you think? Give me an answer. Then the other type is going to go, I'm kind of freaking out over here. I don't know. Give me a minute. And then the other person, the pursuer goes, okay, I'll just chase them faster. And then the other person starts running faster, metaphorically.
What's funny is that makes me think of like, I don't know why, but I'm you're definitely assertive. And I would say flexible. Was it flexible? Assertive?
There's flexible and inflexible.
Right. I think I'm assertive, flexible. I think. But the thing that comes to mind is that there have been times, and I've learned this the hard way through coaching other couples actually, where because I'm assertive and I want to share my thought and I process verbally, it's like I have a fire hose of information. But imagine like an actual fire hose,
Right.
and I'm blasting you with the fire hose and saying, come closer to me, come close. And you're like, I literally can't.
Right.
Right. But I'm like blasting constantly. And I've had to tell our clients and myself, you've got to whittle it down to bullet points. Say them and be done. Like walk away. And this is just a tip to people like me, like the pursuers, like the ones who want to like keep saying the things, is that I think it's really helpful to realize like your partner's got a process. You have a process, they've got a process, and like let it simmer for a bit. Don't just hammer at it all the time.
I'm like cold brewed coffee. I take a really long time, but then the final product is really delicious.
Right. I'm not. I'm like a fire hose of coffee.
What's also really interesting in that you say, and it takes some practice, but a really great reserve type of partner would listen to the assertive, like the fire hose, right? Because that's also moving energy for them and they're processing there. So if the reserve partner said, so in summary, what I'm taking away is 1, 2, 3 would be super great communicator.
Right.
Yeah, because that would give you feedback of, okay, they're tracking. Okay, he's getting what I'm saying. He needs a minute, right? So that's awesome. So I want to bounce around a little, and I also want to be observant of time here. So
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I have a question. What do you wish most couples could understand? If you could give them like 3 nuggets of wisdom of anything that you'd be like, this will transform your marriage. What is it? And you can each have 3 different ones.
Yeah. So first one is just to reiterate what we just said, communication is not one size fits all. And don't expect or get frustrated if your partner has a different style. Just focus on learning more about their type. So that's the first piece. Second piece is to actually see conflict as an opportunity and to focus on healthy conflict skills. So how can I become what we call fight smarter? How can fighting smarter because you're focused on the benefit that it has rather than you being right and having healthy tools for that. The third one?
I like to come up with things on the spot in the moment. And this was something I thought about early in this conversation. I would say, because when couples get to a place where they are confronted with a lot of things and it's feeling more challenging, they often say, if we could only get back to X when we were connected, that even from a science perspective, I won't go into the details, but it's like why time travel is impossible. You cannot go back to a previous energy, to what energy is already available. And you don't want to go back to a previous state. I think that's a huge misnomer because you are already different people than back then.
Right.
Plus, why do you want to go backwards? If you can have a vision statement for where you're going, you can reframe and see challenges as being on the path to the growth and evolution to the future that you're creating.
Right.
So you don't ever need to go back to a place. I understand why people say that, but more so, use the 5 R's, have a vision statement, and then start to see your challenges as on the path to realizing that.
Right. I love that.
That's good.
I love that you said having a vision, because that's one of the things we do with our clients and we talk about it all the time, is like you have to have a vision that's strong enough to draw you forward and pull you out of times when you like trip and fall and you feel, and it's kind of like a marathon. Like people want to do the Iron Man or whatever. Or, is that what's called?
That's a thing.
Isn't that a hero? Iron Man?
It's both. Yeah.
Both. Okay, it's both. That was really weird. My brain just went like super weird for a minute. But that vision of crossing that finish line, having said I completed a marathon, like that vision gets you up and gets you through the hard times. But couples almost never seem to have that vision for their marriage, for their parenting, for their finances. So when they get knocked down, they're like, well, might as well stay down.
Forget it.
Nothing's ever good.
Yeah.
I wish I was like when we were single or didn't have kids or didn't whatever. So I think you have such a great point in saying time travel isn't possible. And I would love to have you nerd out on that and have all the science, because that sounds like a lovely conversation.
Well, Stephen Hawking in his book, something time.
A wrinkle in time. No.
No,
it's a something time, isn't it?
It's on my nightstand. A brief moment in time. A brief
history.
A brief history of time. Right? Yes.
I was close.
Yes, time travel is impossible because of essentially entropy, the amount of energy being available. You can't just get rid of. So anyway, that was the summary of it.
I love it. I love
it. So I was going to ask about something, but I think this maybe be a good segue. So we're talking about what's the shared vision. And before we hit record, you guys just moved from Arizona to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is cool because I'm from South Carolina. So I always like anything Southern basically is like, oh, okay, let's talk about that. But you said, hey, let's go for it. And we made that leap. Can you talk a little bit about how that shared vision of your marriage supported both of you guys making that big leap and what it actually took for you guys to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, multiple factors came in. So our vision is to really impact as many couples as we can, but also for our own personal experience, we believe the purpose of life is to experience purely. Like the purpose of life is to experience as many things as possible. And so I often, when I'm trying to make decisions, of course, make sure it aligns with our vision as a couple, but we also look at when I'm 100 years old, because I plan on being a centenarian, and I'm sitting on the rocking chair. For some reason, I imagine I'm on a rocking chair.
Very vibrantly.
Yes. Very, very energetic centenarian. Will I be glad that I didn't do this or did? And so even if I don't know the outcome, like moving, I was terrified. We have such a network in Arizona. Like literally we have access to any contact, anything. And so I was really nervous, but I knew that the 100-year-old self would wonder if I never lived anywhere else. So wanting to experience as much as possible in life made a big difference. Anything else you'd add about the move?
No, it's just, having a really clear vision statement, and probably similar to you, we actually have 5 steps to create one that you can remember. But by having that, we just can make decisions a lot faster. So we said, does this seem that it moves that vision forward? And then similar to what Jocelyn was saying, does staying in Arizona at this moment move that vision forward? And it, honestly just seemed that moving, though we didn't know what the next thing was going to be on the path. So I think that's one of the things, is just to get to that place of trust and intuition and guidance and knowing to just take the next step, rather than sometimes our logical mind is like, well, I don't see 4 or 5 steps ahead, but pretty much never will, right? If you can confidently step out to the next step you see, then sometimes the 3rd and 4th pass open up only after you get there.
Right. Because you can only take one step at a time. If I'm walking, out the door of a studio or to China, it all starts with one step, right?
Can't get on step 18.
My father-in-law, her dad, talks about what is the best next step, not the 100th step later, but the best next step right here, right now. So that's really helpful.
And one of the things you said too that I love is that having a vision, and you said it like this, it helps us make decisions faster. I would love you to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's one thing couples don't see. You don't know it till you've done it, kind of a thing. And so how does it help you make decisions faster to have a vision?
Well, because then rather than it being a my opinion versus yours, or focusing on the doubts or the fears, the considerations, like even people who go like, I'm going to make a positive and minus list, rather than it being based on opinions or differences, it's more so, does this align with the vision? And if it aligns with the vision, we have almost always said yes, even if it was a scary investment, or it was an opportunity, or it was a trip, or it was giving money away, like the move, if it aligned with the vision, then we trusted the vision rather than some opinion or difference.
Right. I think that's really powerful too, because oftentimes some people, Seth included, are very good at talking himself out or into something based on emotion. And if we don't have that like very sort of solid core of our vision, we can persuade or dissuade ourselves from doing something that was either harmful or helpful or whatever.
Right.
So I love that having a vision really does. It's like a through line. It carries you toward what you want. And even the idea of creating a vision is really connecting for couples like that.
Or a vision board. We have 2 vision boards.
We do. Yeah. We do with our kids even.
Yeah. That's
I
awesome.
love it.
So, okay. I know we're bumping up against time here. So I want to ask you a parting question. Then of course, where people can find all your stuff. What is one thing that is bringing you guys jazz now? It can be anything from like, well, I bake cookies twice a day, or like I carve wood and I love it. I don't know. It doesn't matter what it's related to. What is bringing you guys super interest in jazz?
You first.
Well, after the quarantine and getting a book deal and writing it during quarantine and talking about it and promoting it, it comes out on March 16th. So
holding our book would be the thing we're most jazzed about. Like, I just want to physically hold it.
I meditate in the morning, like visualizing holding it. Finally.
Right on.
I love that.
Right on. That's awesome.
And is that the same for you, Jocelyn?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I'm super similar. Like literally can't wait to hold it. It was such a miraculous story how it all happened anyway. So I think watching, like almost seeing the miracle finally come into complete fruition will be really cool.
That's
Awesome.
awesome.
Well, yeah. So talk about the book, where people can get it, and of course the launch date of it, and maybe just a brief story of like how did it happen? How did it
Oh,
come to
because the
fruition?
miracle caught you. You were curious about the miracle, right?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Yeah. So I'll tell the miracle story first because then it kind of sets up the excitement for it. So a few years ago now, it must be 3.5 years ago, we had made a difference with one couple. We'd coached them. They were really in a breakdown season, made a difference, not knowing that he's like ridiculously connected. Like you would not know the powerful people he's connected to, just a humble guy. So
Mhm.
one day we're on our way home from the gym and we get this call and he's like, hey, there's this couple that needs your support. They happen to be famous, but they'll be at your house in an hour. And we're like, what? Like, okay.
Yeah.
So we treat every human the same, right? So didn't matter who they were, that they were, known around the world, and just treated them just as human beings, made a difference with them, supported them over a year, never made it about money, never asked for favors, never said, oh, since you're so networked, could you connect us to this person? Just added value. So one day we get this introduction to a publisher and the publisher, knowing them, loved our concept. We told them about the Argument Hangover. It actually started with a different concept, slightly like a more inclusive of a bunch of topics, but we all really love just focusing on just the Argument Hangover. So we got the book deal. It was actually like a month into quarantine when we got the email, and the world's like breaking down, and then we get the email and we're like, wow, what? It's just a cool manifestation of you never know where a relationship's going to go, and you never know what's going to happen if you just focus on adding value.
Yeah.
Oh,
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That is really cool. So, okay, talk about the book. Where can people get it? I'm assuming they can get it everywhere, but I don't want to assume anything. So
yeah, everywhere. So all the, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the retailers. And here's the thing, because it comes out in March, depending on when this airs, it really is worth even pre-ordering, because we're actually giving $200 worth of pre-order bonuses, including 2 trainings on communication, conflict, emotional triggers, being better listeners. And that can all be claimed at theargumenthangover.com. So you also get a workbook. So it's just worth, you order the book, but for, the price of a book, you get $200 worth of courses. So theargumenthangover.com.
awesome.
That's awesome.
That is, yeah. So you guys pre-order it now. You get all the goodies. Probably you won't be able to get the goodies if you don't pre-order it. So go to theargumenthangover.com right now. And any other handles or anything where you want people to find out more about you guys?
Yeah, well, we're super social on Instagram. So we're Meet the Freemans, MEET, the Freemans, and that's also our website. So connect with us on Instagram, hang out with us on our website.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you guys so much.
You guys are really encouraging and inspiring. And I love the level of deep thinking that you bring into the marriage space. And just to sort of affirm and thank you for the work that you're doing, because when we change marriages, we change families. And when we change families, we change lives, we change the world. So I just love your passion for it, that you followed it. I just deeply respect that. Being in the same field, we know how hard it is. It's a big thing to tackle, and you guys are doing an amazing job. So I really want to air 5, shout an air 5. So yeah, woo! Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll send up links to all of to the book and all of that, the pre-order and everything. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for
guys.
having us, guys.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.